I'm really pleased to be given the opportunity to present my narratological commentary. The idea was that it would have been published by now, but it hasn't. It will come out the end of February or beginning of March. But anyway, so in what follows, and you already see the cover, and I hope you can recognize it's a Kandinsky. I love it a lot, and it is in a Dutch museum, so that's an extra nice thing. So in what follows, I will first explain some of my basic aims and principles, including also some of the practical problems which any commentator faces, and then I will present some examples of lemmata. So let me start with the question, why a narratological commentary on Herodotus? Well, Herodotus has always been my second big love after Homer. And I think by now, after 10 years, both hold equal first places in my heart. So I once edited in 2002, together with Hans van Wees and Egbert Bakker, a Brill companion to Herodotus. At that time, I had also written some research papers, but especially I gave a lot of talks to schools in schools on Herodotus, since as everywhere in the world, Herodotus is a constant staple on the school menu in Holland. And particularly these schools lectures sort of whetted my appetite. So slowly the idea grew in my mind to write a narratological commentary on this text, like the one I had written for the Odyssey in 2001. In 2014, I started working, and about 10 years later, I finished, and it took a CUP quite some time to present the book, but well, that's okay. Now, embarking on writing this commentary, I was right away faced with two issues, or as politicians like to say, challenges. The first one was that the mass of secondary literature had not been canalized and summarized as much as in the case of Homer. In Homer, you have plenty commentaries, so a lot of collecting of material has already been done for a commentator. In 2014, there were only two green and yellows, Marincola Flower on book 9 and Hornblower on book 5. And there were, of course, the Valla Italian commentaries, but these are mainly historical. So one of my challenges was to collect, sift, summarize a really mass of studies. I think I have covered most of them, at least the literary ones, but still from time to time I come across something and I think, oh, I have missed this one. Now the second challenge concerned the format or the layout of the commentary. In my Odyssey commentary, I could quite easily divide the text and work from large lemmata to small lemmata. So for instance, in the case of book 1, I would start with a lemma on the telemachy, then one on book 1, then one on the proem, and I would then end up with a lemma on andra, on one word. That worked quite well. And I started to do this for Herodotus too, but it didn't work out. In Herodotus, and maybe it's because it's a prose text, it was very hard to, or indeed impossible, to cut up the text and then make good lemmata, because everything hangs together. So after some time, I decided to proceed in a different way. And I will later give you some examples. I have divided up the text in subsections and then give a kind of running commentary first. And then it is for this, so this can be some pages long, and then I have separate lemmata that deal with outstanding narratological details or that offer systematic discussion that would too much disrupt the flow of the running commentary. So a decision rather easily taken was not to try and cover the whole of the histories. I have chosen parts of all 9 books, and I'll give you an overview here. And of course, I have the juicy, nice parts. But I haven't done everything you see for book 2. I only have 2 little sections. And but even so, even this selection, which is, I think, about 2/3 of the histories, takes up, in the end, 638 pages. So I thought, Ars longa vita brevis, this must be enough. Now, in order to compensate for the fact that I do not read the whole text, I have 2 services. The first is at the end of the book, and many books on Herodotus have this, I have given a sort of summary, a very detailed summary of the whole of the histories. But also in between the sections that I do comment on, I have also summaries that are specifically geared to the context of an upcoming section. So, because as we all know, the structure of Herodotus increasingly, book 1 is fine, but book 5 is a nightmare, is increasingly complex. So I think it would be good for people who just jump into the commentary and want to look at one specific part to be able to orient themselves. So that these are some of the practical aspects. Now for the content. For what is a narratological commentary? What does it do and what does it not do? Well, narratology, as you know, is that branch of literary criticism that specifically deals with narrative text. Its heydays were the 70s and the 80s of the previous century, when a number of very useful and practical models were developed. I must say nowadays narratology, I think, it has become very detailed, and I'm not so au courant with the latest developments in theory. Now, in my dissertation on the Iliad, I learned to wield the narratological toolkit under the energetic supervision of Mieke Bal, one of the leading narratologists. And in the course of the years afterwards, I have collected a very eclectic number of helpful terms, which I have summarized in this little book. And it's really supposed to be a practical guide. And as you know, although narratology was developed for and in connection with modern novels, it has turned out to be quite well applicable to ancient texts, because, as René Nulist has shown in his book on the ancient critic at work, a lot of modern narratological terms, in fact, already, sometimes with different terminology, in ancient literary criticism. So there's a lot of overlap. Now, recently, some scholars have argued, both Eva van Konsen and Tilg and Jonas Greetlein, that perhaps the structuralist approach to narratology is not entirely correct, that we should factor in more historical context. A narrator in antiquity or in medieval times is something else than a narrator in the present. And I can see their point. I have contributed to the book by von Konsen, but I must say, I think I'm too old myself now to change my ways. So I still use the old set of terms like prolepsis, analepsis, focalization, narrator, and things like that. But I am aware that this is debatable. Now, of course, the application of narratology to a historiographical text asks a little bit more of an explanation than in the case of the Odyssey. I talk about this at length in chapter 7 of my little handbook. And of course, I have a discussion of this in the introduction to my commentary, and I want to be very brief here now and not repeat myself. Basically, the idea is that ancient historiography, and indeed all historiography up until the 19th century, was of a narrative form. And so it's quite easy to use narratological concepts for narrative historiography. But of course, and this is one very crucial thing, let's say, ontological status of all kind of narrative devices, such as being able to read the minds of characters, taking up a panoramic standpoint, anticipating the future, is very different in a historiographical text than in an epic text where you have the assistance of the muses, or in a novel, which is purely fictional and you can do whatever you like. And this, of course, is the crucial point. And exactly this is what has bothered ancient historians a lot when reading Herodotus. They do not always appreciate him using all kind of storytelling devices rather than providing exact numbers, details about place and time, in short, the kind of very specific information we nowadays expect from a historian. And I think you are all familiar with the kind of grumpy scholarship on Herodotus that calls him chaotic, uninformative, naive, or conversely very biased. Now, things, of course, have changed a lot for the better the last decades, in which, in particular, the information which Herodotus provides for non-Greek cultures have become more and more appreciated. But my approach in the narratological commentary is radically different one, because I more or less completely abstain from reading Herodotus as a historical source. That is, I am not, my aim is not to find out via his text, wie is eigentlich gewesen. I'm not interested in what really happened. I am interested in the kind of narrative Herodotus wants to tell, and I am particularly interested in the ways in which he tells his story. So what I do is to provide close readings, which I hope can help to better understand how he tells something, why, and to what effect. And of course, in the end, this teaches us a lot about his ideas about historiography, etc. I sometimes say something about it, but it's not my main object. I'm not an ancient historian, I'm a literary critic, so I'm really interested in his handling of the narrative. Now, I have in my commentary, I have several focal points. The first focal point is to show how in adopting, adapting, and expanding the narratological toolbox of Homer, Herodotus successfully manages to endow the new genre of prose historiography with the same authority as its illustrious predecessor, epic. And I will now start to give you some examples. A refined narrative device is that of what I once called the hidden thought. We get to know what the character thinks, but does not say. And the Odyssey has numerous examples of this device when Odysseus is being abused by the suitors, and we get to know his angry thoughts, but he keeps his mouth shut. So that's a very subtle narrative device. And in the same device, you can find that in Herodotus, for instance, and there are many instances, but I give you one example. In the episode of Astyages finding out that his grandson Cyrus is still alive, as you remember, the youth is playing the role of king, so the young Cyrus is playing the role of king. He has another youth threshed. The boy goes up to his father, and the father goes up to Astyages and accuses Cyrus. And of course, as Herodotus very remarks, Cyrus was not called Cyrus yet. But anyway, and Cyrus speaks in Astyages says, "What did you do?" And Cyrus speaks in a certain way, and then this is my lemma. In an extended passage of embedded vocalization, the narrator presents us the three factors which lead to Astyages' recognition of Cyrus: the use countenance, his rather free way, eleuterotere, of answering, which suggests a ruler rather than a simple cowherd. And then I have a reference to a note on the notion of free speech, and his age. We are dealing with hidden thoughts, and I have a discussion of this phenomenon in general in 116.1. Since Astyages is speechless, his silence, and again I refer to a synoptic discussion of silence in Herodotus, his silence indicates perplexity, but at the same time is functional in that he does not reveal that he has recognized Cyrus. He does send Artambares away without saying what he has just discovered. So this is an example of my lemma. Now another epic device is the interlace technique. This technique consists in a narrator closely weaving together two scenes of action by repeatedly, very quickly switching between them and showing how characters get to know and react to developments taking place elsewhere, or fail to do so. The interlace technique is a term that derived from medieval studies, where in medieval songs you find, or poems you find that a lot. It can be observed, for instance, in Homer, in the Odyssey, where you have the suitors. So Homer switches very quickly from the suitors to Penelope to the suitors. So the suitors hear of Telemachus' departure and plan an ambush. Penelope reacts with despair to Telemachus' departure and the suitors' plan. Then we go back to the suitors who prepare their departure. Then we go back to Penelope. Penelope is assured about Telemachus by Athena, and then the suitors depart and take up their position near the island of Asteris. Now, the effect of this very quick, of course, we have many changes of scene in the Odyssey, but the thing is really that this happens at close quarters. And so the effect is twofold. We see the depravity of the suitors, which is contrasted with Penelope, and especially it makes clear the ineffectiveness of their ambush. For a moment, Penelope and we as narratees are perhaps anxious about it, but even before it sets into motion, we are given divine assurance that Telemachus will come home safely. So it's very effective, this quick going back and forth. And you have a very similar example in book 3, where at the climax of the denouement of the coup of the two Magians, and there you have this going back and forth between the 7 conspirators, amongst whom, of course, Darius, and the two Magians. So we start with the conspirators deliberating how to kill the Magians. Then Herodotus quickly switches to the Magians, who are also deliberating and who want to enlist Prexaspes to support their cause. But as you know, he tells the truth and then kills himself. Then Herodotus moves to the conspirators again, who proceed to the palace without knowing about Prexaspes' act, which is, of course, in their favor. But when they are informed about it, they once more deliberate and then decide to press on. And then we go back to the Magians inside the palace, who are deliberating what to do after Prexaspes' act. And then in the end, the two strands come together, the conspirators and the Magians battle, which is won by the former. Now, of course, the Homeric epics are not the only literary model of Herodotus. There must also have been a tradition of prose narration. Unfortunately, we have no specimens, or hardly any specimens, of that genre. So we cannot really trace its influence with any certainty. And older scholarship always talks about folk tale style. And I must say, I have I have refrained from using that term. Maybe I've been a bit too stern. When I was rereading for this presentation, I thought, well, maybe I could have been a bit more liberal here. But I always get a bit shifty when people start talking about the Ionian novella without we having any Ionian novella. But there are certain devices where you can that are not very Homeric and which, for instance, well, I'll come to talk about it, resemble the style in the Bible, and where you can think, well, this must be more of a kind of oral prose narration. So, but for me, of course, as a Homerist, it was inevitable that I would try to find as much as possible by way of Homeric storytelling devices in Herodotus. Now, a second focal point of my commentary concerns repetition, of which there are many forms. Verbal repetition, the repetition of words functioning as a leitmotif, and that the leitmotif thing is, I think, something of a folktale thing, which you do not find in that way in Homer. We have, of course, the repetition of words at the beginning and end, the ring composition. Then you have the very important, and I pay a lot of attention to that, recurrent patterns, scenes, themes, motifs they are all over the place, and they give unity to a text which, at first sight, looks a little bit bewildering and looks like not so well structured, but when you take into account all the themes and motifs, you see that it is usually very well structured. And then there is the narratological category of repetition, which means that the same event can be told more than once. So you have the version of the narrator, and then you have a character looking back on what has happened. And of course, you will see that there's a lot of framing and distortion and rhetoric going on when characters look back on what they have done. So I'll give you some examples. For instance, in the case of patterns, themes, and motifs, I followed the example of my Odyssey commentary, and also, for instance, the format of the Basiler Homer commentary. And that means that for recurrent themes, scenes, at some point, I give what I call a synoptic discussion. So I say, okay, and I'll give you an example from a dream, typical scene. And I say, well, a dream in Herodotus normally will consist of these elements. And then when at every dream in the commentary, I will look at this typical structure and show, because there are all kinds of variations in the order, there are variations as things are left out or whatever. So that is how I proceed for dreams, oracles, battle scenes, catalogs. Well, there are many things that allow this kind of structural approach. And I'll give you an example from a very well-known dream scene, and that is Cruce's dream in book 1 about his son. So in that case, you would read the following. The story proper, so I have already said some things about this, but I only look at the dream now. The story proper then starts with the dream scene. And when you see the asterisk, and I explained this in my introduction, you know, a dream scene. So there will be somewhere a synoptic discussion of dream scenes. And you have to go to the index to find the exact place, because certain things occur so often that it would be a bit cumbersome to give cross-references all the time. In other cases, when something does not occur so often, I give you right away the place of the synoptic discussion. So a dream scene in Herodotus normally consists of an indication of the time, and onto the actual dream. So I'll read it to you. So the time immediately, autica, after Solon's departure, is important in that it strengthens Herodotus' hypothesis that Attis' death, which the dream announces, is due to divine nemesis at Croesus' thinking himself, obiotatos, since it was the conversation with Solon which had shown him expressing this view. So even such a small word like autica, which normally you would not pay attention to, is very important because it suggests or confirms his idea that there's a relation between Solon, the dialogue with Solon, and the dream. Then the second typical element is the dream itself. You have two types, a visit type and a messenger type. I am not going into that now. The dream is of the messenger type. Croesus is told about the death of his son. So he doesn't see something, but someone comes to him and tells it. And the dream tried to reveal the imperfect ephine is conative, the truth. And aletheia, and again an asterisk, I have a discussion somewhere of all the words for truth in Herodotus. And aletheia usually means truth as the opposite of a lie. So he tried to reveal the truth of the calamities that were bound to happen, fatal mellow, in connection with his son. The formulation already hints that the death of his son will also greatly impact Croesus himself. The narrator thus makes clear to the narratees that the dream will come true and that Croesus fails to interpret its message, but before revealing what that message is, provides background information concerning the son mentioned by the dream. I skip a little bit because otherwise it would be too long. Oh, sorry, I make a mistake. I must go back. Yeah, okay. So now so you get after the introduction of the son, which I skip. Now the narrator can reveal all the more effectively, having introduced the son who is going to die at this, all the more effectively that that dream signals. The historical present Semaine is the first in a series which punctuates the crucial steps in the story, to Croesus concerning that Attis, that he will lose him. Apole also hints that Croesus himself will in a way destroy his son, because it can mean lose or, destroy. Because he is struck by an iron spear. Now, then, something you will find in all commentaries, but I of course, I cannot leave it out. The verb semaine is typical of divine communications opacity. CF Heraclitus, blah, blah. And then you get the third typical element, that's the reaction of the dreamer. Croesus' reaction consists of interpreting the dream himself rather than consulting dream experts. He associates the spear with war and hence has his son marry. The crucial event is marked by historical present agatai. Forbids him to lead military expeditions anymore and removes all weapons that people use for war from the men's quarters. His not consulting expert, which you will find in other dream scenes, reveals his intention to keep the dream a secret and also puts the full weight of its fatal misinterpretation on him. The narratees know, on account of the header of the whole story, that Croesus' measures will be in vain. But since the narrator does not reveal the exact circumstances of Attis' death, they are not completely in the know, which increases suspense and their empathy with Croesus. The dream's fulfillment will follow in 43.3 after two reminders and a second reaction now of the son. And the evaluation, the typical evaluation, will be given by Croesus in 45.2. And then at the end, I give some references to this for bibliographical reference for this particular dream. And I have many more in the larger lemma on this episode of Croesus and his son. And of course, in the synoptic lemma on dreams, you will find Thomas Harrison and all the other experts on religious matters. Now, at later, here I discuss the whole dream at this early place in the commentary. So if you use the commentary, you get the whole thing. Of course, as narratees, you must wait a little bit longer, but anyway. And then at the later point, for instance, in 43.3, when the dream is fulfilled, I must, of course, come back to that fact. So that is what you will see here. In 43.3, I write, Ates' death means the fulfillment of Cruce's dream, as the narrator signals both implicitly, through the verbal echo, bletei stei aigmei, which more or less echoes aigmei siderie bletenta, and explicitly, he fulfilled the prophetic words of the dream. For the dream, see 34 note. So if you happen to only look at this point, you are referred back, of course, to the whole discussion of the dream, which we have just looked at. Now, the number of themes and motives is very high. And of course, many had already been defined by scholars, Immerwahr, and many others before. But one of the advantages of my commentary dealing with the whole of the histories, and not single books like Green Yellows, I usually can present a more complete picture because I try to find all instances in the entire histories. And let me illustrate what this means in the following example. If at some point Astyages gives a command to his servant Harpagus, who is called most trusted, pistotaton, in 108.3. And de Walt and Munson in their Green-Yellow write, Astyages makes the erroneous assumption that he can command the uncritical loyalty of his closest subordinates. This is an ongoing Herodotean motif. The difficulties and misjudgments that result from the tendency of the powerful to expect nothing but unquestioning loyalty from subordinates and relatives who turn out to have agendas of their own. This is basically an excellent note. This is what's it about. But of course, the Green Yellows are Gesamtkommentare, so they have to deal with many more things than I have to do. So I can spend a little bit more time on this pistotaton. So I have a large note which runs as follows. When the narrator notes most trusted, this usually signals the opposite. It adds the person turns out not to be reliable. Harpagus will betray the trust Astyages puts in him by not killing Cyrus. Harpagus's most trusted bodyguards inspect the dead child, but do not see that it is a different child. Amasis sends the most trusted of his eunuchs to bring back Phanes, but the servant, outwitted by Phanes, never accomplishes his mission. Polycrates sends his most trusted servant Maiandrius, etc., etc. I won't read them all. And then a complex case is Plexaspes. As Cambyses' most trusted servant, he kills Smerdis. After his master's death, he first denies the murder and thus supports this usurpation by the false Smerdis. But in the end, when the usurpers who consider him most trusted among, that is, I think, both by but also of the Persians, ask him to publicly confirm their claim to the throne, he unmasks them and thus betrays their trust but restores his loyalty towards the Achaemenids. Okay, then we can have what I always like a lot is the combination of motifs. And you find that, for instance, when Histiaeus, the death of Histiaeus, and I'm glad that you're all experts, so I can just say this, and I reckon that you know which episode I'm talking about. So here is what I write there. the episode is an instance of the taking captive alive motif, and you see the synoptic discussion in book 7. More specifically, the variant in which a person is recognized in the nick of time. C.F. Croesus, who is identified by his son at the very moment that he is about to be killed by a Persian soldier, and Miltiades, who is identified by Croesus when taken captive by the Lampsacines and released. The present instant is deeply ironic in that Histiaeus identifies himself at the moment he is taken captive, but thereby actually affects his own death. See Greenwood. When the Greeks, so this is a sort of a first announcement, and then I zoom in. When the Greeks are put to flight by the Persian cavalry, Histiaeus, being convinced that he would not be put to death by Darius because of his recent offense, hamartada, chooses, historical presence, the following, prospective pronoun toyendatina, by way of saving his life. In calling his own behavior, leaving Darius under false pretenses and assuming leadership of the Ionians in their revolt, a hamartada, Histiaeus adopts Darius' vocalization. Darius will consider this a hamartada, he himself of course not. But he assumes that the king will forgive him because of his earlier aergesia. CF blah blah, where Xerxes considers Sandokas' good deeds greater than his offenses, hamartematon. Then the Hapax Philopsychian points up the irony of Histiaeus doing something that will actually cost him his life, and, as Hornblower and Pelling note, also has the negative ring of someone clinging to life rather than dying bravely on the battlefield. When he is caught by a Persian and is about to be stabbed to death, Histiaeus identifies himself crying out in the Persian language. This is one of the few places in the histories where the narrative convention of shared language is broken and explicit reference is made to a character being able to speak a foreign language. The detail is significant since it underscores, once again, the irony of Histiaeus actively contributing to his own death. And now I can show you again the difference between a normal commentary, Gesamtkommentar, and a narratological commentary. Hornblower Pelling note that they have a historical note about Histiaeus knowing enough Persian to be able to do this, although he would not need much of the language merely to identify himself. It is possible that the Greeks exaggerated their ignorance of other languages and that Histiaeus' linguistic ability was not at all that unusual, especially for someone in a frontier zone like Milesian. So this is another approach. This is a historical approach. What do we know? Is this strange that Histiaeus does this? Whereas I have a note on the fact that in literary text, and here I have my synoptic discussion, which I won't read completely, but in narrative text, you usually have a convention of shared language. Everybody can talk with everybody, no problem. And only occasionally this convention is broken because someone knows a language or there are interpreters, and that is always significant. Good. Then an aspect of Herodotus, which I have given a lot of attention to, are the speeches. I have, in the end, decided to paraphrase all the speeches in my corpus. And in doing so, I have tried to lay bare the rhetoric of the speaker. So his or her intentions, strategies, manipulations, of which there are a lot. The structure of dialogues, how do people react to each other, and the relation between narrator and character. And I think you will have heard about this from Mathieu de Backer, who was my pupil and who wrote his thesis and now his book on the last same point, which is always very revealing to compare the narrator's version and the character's version. And just to show you how this looks, I've thought long about how to present this in a commentary form, and this is what I have ended up with. I give you an example from book 4, Histiaius, who is of course a very subtle, shrewd speaker. And it is in a speech of his to the Scythians. They leave it, so the Greek Ionian tyrants leave it to Histiaius to answer the Scythians, which gives us a first taste of his talent for duplicity. In his speech, presented in DD, direct discourse, he profusely copies the rhetoric of you and we that the Scythians had used in their speeches before, and which, in his case falsely, suggest cooperation. So, Scythians, you come with good advice, and your haste is well timed, as Chiron. What you can do for us is usually set in motion, while we are duly carrying out what is necessary for you. For as you can see, we are both dismantling the breach and will spare no effort. Protumian Pasan is ambiguous. The Scythians should understand it to mean support for their cause, but the narratees may recall Darius asking the Ionians for Pasan Protumian to defend the bridge. Since we want to be free, his Telontes einen eleuteroi suggestively echoes the Scythians' up ite eleuteroi in dialogic resonance. While we dismantle this bridge, it's the right moment for you, so an echo of Kairos again, for you to seek out the Persians and having found them, wreak upon them the revenge they deserve. Now, the dialogic resonance is something I learned from the linguist in my department, and that is very useful concept that which you find in all conversations, also your own conversation, that people usually echo words of their interlocutors, either to agree or to disagree. I see I'm nearing the time, so I'll speed up. I'm nearly finished with my examples. This is an example where how I try typographically to show the structure of conversations, of dialogues. This is very much, if you know my commentary on the Odyssey, how I did it in the Odyssey. And here you can see ABC structure and then in reverse order, CBA. And you see all the ways in which Gyges echoes or the words of Candaules. So I'm not going to read this one. And I would like to end with an example that features one of the most important narratological concepts, focalization or point of view, and it concerns the Battle of Artemisium. And I'll read this section to you. The Battle of Artemisium is a prime locus for differential appreciation of Herodotus' work on the part of historians and literary critics. The former are puzzled by chronological unclarities and unrealistic details, e.g., opponents being able to see each other's ships at a distance of 80 states, that is nearly 15 kilometers. While the latter, so the literary critics, observe an extremely well-organized episode, writes Immerwahr. Although the latter qualification may be too strong, what stands out is the immersive quality of the battle, which in this respect anticipates the most famous sea battle of antiquity, the battle in the harbor of Syracuse, as narrated by Thucydides. And then I explain immersion. That's another concept that I learned from my linguistic colleagues here, and I've worked on it myself. Immersion means that narratees have the feeling that they are transported into the world of the narrative to such an extent that they seem to experience the events themselves. Now, you see some scholarship. Such a feeling may be affected by a scenic narrative rhythm, including frequent time markers, much embedded vocalization, and many historical presence. Another example is blah, blah, blah. I skip, and then my last example. So here I give you an example of how this works, this immersion. The narrator then switches back to the Persians' vocalization. When Xerxes and his admirals saw the Greeks advancing against them with few ships, they considered them mad and themselves got underway, expecting to capture them easily. A highly reasonable expectations, since they saw few ships on the Greek side and many times more and better ships on their own side. Thinking with a sense of superiority, thus, they started to encircle the Greek fleet. So this is my sort of paraphrase of the Greek text with some, with my italic, I show the embedded vocalization. The point of Persian numerical superiority is made once more, it's made all the time in this part of the histories, and is now strengthened by the motive of the Persians considering the Greeks mad, which is a bit ubiquitous in the histories. I give a synoptic note, but especially recalls the Battle of Marathon. When the Persians saw the Greeks running towards them, they considered them mad, seeing them charge while being so few. The narrator qualifies the Persian expectation of victory as reasonable, but signals at the same time with easily that things will not be easy, and with kataphronizantes that the Persian sense of superiority is mistaken. So this is my last example. I hope I have given you some idea about the kind of lemmata you might find. I write in my introduction, and I would like to repeat this because I really think this is the case. I am convinced that given the scale of the histories, its complexities, and the amount of literary research still to be done, I will have missed or misunderstood much. I gave a lecture some days ago for school, and I already saw something, and I thought, no, this is not right what you're saying here. But anyway, I can only hope that my commentary, with its focus on the narrative art of the history, will form a springboard for further research. I have thoroughly enjoyed spending a decade on this fascinating text, and if my commentary likewise increases the joy of Herodotus readers, I will consider my mission accomplished. I thank you.